Good afternoon. I'm Chris Haak from AutoSavant.com. I'm today's substitute teacher for the afternoon commute. You may have noticed that our normal afternoon commute star, Kevin Gordon, has not been with us for a little while. He's had some great news in his family. His wife had a baby a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it's their third. So when Kevin comes back, please wish him all the best and congratulate him on the birth of his third daughter. So with that being said, Kevin should be back next week, and you're only stuck with me for another day or two. So let's talk a little bit about China. China is a very important auto market. It is the world's largest car market and probably will remain so for the next couple of decades. Forget about the US being the world's largest car market. China is pulling away, and we're going to probably see 30 million cars a year sold in China in the next several years, like maybe 10 years from now. In the US, best case scenario is maybe like 17 or 18 million in the next 5 years per year. So China is an important market for a lot of companies. There's a lot of Chinese OEMs, Chinese-based companies that are starting to make inroads in their market. More successful than those Chinese automakers, though, are foreign automakers, which, as you may or may not know, are required to operate in a joint venture with a local company. And they can't have more than 50% of the foreign company can't have more than 50% of the joint venture. So GM has, and Volkswagen, and to a lesser degree some other competitors such as Mercedes-Benz, Audi, well, that's part of Volkswagen. They've done fairly well in China, especially GM and Volkswagen. Those two are taking the largest share of foreign car sales in China. And Ford, despite doing pretty well in most of the rest of the world, although Ford has its own problems in Europe, we're seeing Ford finally rolling out a little bit of a Chinese strategy. So they are selling the Focus, a couple of other models in China. Their market share in China is nowhere near what GM's or Volkswagen's is, though. But Ford announced yesterday that they're going to actually be introducing the Lincoln brand in China. So that's kind of interesting for a couple of reasons. Lincoln right now is, I believe, exclusively a North American brand. You can get Lincolns in Mexico, you can get Lincolns in Canada, and of course in the US. Lincoln as a brand has not been doing all that well. First of all, it's North American specific. So, just while GM is trying to do a little bit more with Cadillac, they at least do sell Cadillacs once in a while outside of the US and Canada and Mexico. Lincoln, though, has been not having that great of a year, and in fact they've not had that great of a couple of years. So let's think about Lincoln's lineup. They have the MKT, which is based on the Ford Flex, not been selling well. They have the MKS, which is based on the Taurus, also not selling well. Those two have just had an update in recent months, and I don't think that's really kind of stemming the tide. The biggest change, aside from the front clip looking like a different species of whale, they now have the My Lincoln Touch, which is, good or bad depending on your perspective. I'm not sure that it's a good thing, but at any rate, they have that. There's the MKX, which is the crossover based on the Ford Edge. That had a refresh last year, and that one, I'm not sure how the sales are doing on that one. I don't think it's really lighting the world on fire. The MKZ, which is based on the Fusion, that's going to be redone later this year, and that actually looks really great. That's an impressive looking car, and considering it's pretty pedestrian routes, it's basically a Ford Fusion with a nicer body and a nicer interior. I think it looks really good. That one is one of the cars that's going to make its way to China. So Ford executives, I believe it was yesterday, trotted out an MKZ 2013 model year to China, and they said, hey, listen, we're gonna launch the Lincoln brand in China. We've got a little bit of brand recognition here, similar to what Buick had with the nobility or the upper crust in China years ago, which sort of allowed GM to springboard its way into launching Buick or relaunching Buick in China. Apparently Chinese consumers, at least some of them, have heard of Lincoln, and there's no negative connotations. So if you're going to launch Lincoln outside of North America, I guess maybe China makes sense. I'm not sure that the particular lineup Lincoln has right now is really a great fit for China. So Lincoln may need to consider other cars besides just the MKZ. I think the MKS, MKT, probably the MKX is going to be too big. The engines are too big. The cars are too big. The MKZ will probably be about as big of a car as they'd want to sell there. And apparently they're going to somehow improve rear seat space, which may mean a wheelbase stretch. That's usually what they do. There's a stretched 3 Series, a stretched A4. Heck, Cadillac even sold a stretched STS that they called the SLS a few years ago that was built in China for Chinese, because Chinese who are able to afford luxury cars typically don't drive their own car. They pay for a driver. So the back seat space is important. What's not important necessarily to the Chinese luxury car buyer is horsepower and engine size. So expect to see smaller engines like a 2-liter EcoBoost, something along those lines in the MKZ. I think we'll also see probably a smaller car and from Lincoln in China. That car may end up making its way to the US. A few years ago, Lincoln showed, I believe it was called the Concept C, or maybe it was MKC, I forget the name, but that's probably what it would be called. C-segment car, compact car, 4-cylinder only. It showed up as a concept in Detroit as a hatchback. That may or may not be what they end up doing. But Lincoln has to improve its sales. In a growing market where the market's grown about 10% this year so far, Lincoln's basically flat, if not down slightly. So Lincoln needs to come up with a way to build volume in the US, and of course they're going to need a smaller car in China, so it all kind of adds up and works out. So expect to see Lincolns in China sometime around 2014, second half, maybe 2015 model year. I think we'll hear a lot more about this. They may even end up building them in China, which would be good for a number of reasons. Primary on there is probably import duties. And also, labor is a lot cheaper in China. So Lincoln's in China, second half 2014. We talked about a couple of months ago. I wrote an article for Autosavant.com, our main website, about how the rotary engine, may have met its doom finally. It really doesn't have very many fans or very much support outside of Mazda, and Mazda had ended production of the RX-8. And of course the RX-8 is the last production car that had the rotary engine. Years ago, Mazda was selling over 100,000 cars a year with rotary engines. And rotary engines are good and bad. Good in that they are extremely compact and power dense, so you're getting a lot of power for a pretty small footprint. Bad in that they burn oil, they're not particularly fuel efficient, and they're kind of gutless as far as torque goes. The horsepower, they're all right, but not a lot of torque. So the RX-8 went away, out of production, hasn't been sold in the US for a few years. It's a heck of a car to drive, though, at least if you can keep momentum going. Fantastic handling car. But today, at I believe it's the St. Petersburg Auto Show, one of those shows in Russia, Mazda, one of the Mazda executives confirmed that there is going to be a future rotary engine, and they may have actually found a good use for it. It's going to be a range extender in an electric vehicle. And that's good news for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's cool to have an alternative to the piston engine. Number two, it's neat to have Mazda have that identity, with the rotary engine and kind of the heritage that means to that company. Number three, because of the compact size of a rotary engine, it would fit pretty well in an electric vehicle, a relatively small vehicle without taking up a lot of space and weight. Number four, the torque isn't really all that important, nor is the mileage, because the batteries the electric motor is going to provide most of the torque. And fuel economy, not really a problem either, because the rotaries, when serving as a range extender, it's going to be able to run pretty close to its peak operating speed, which is about 2,000 RPMs apparently. So that's kind of neat news to see the rotary coming out pretty soon. So expect to see this car come out for Japan only, at least initially, sometime, I believe, next year. And then I guess it depends on how well that vehicle does in the Japanese market, whether it becomes something that they export or anything like that. So kind of neat, glad to see that, and kind of curious to see what kind of car it winds up in, because they didn't give any details about whether it's going to be an all-new car, whether it's going to be a car that's already in production that's just going to have a new drivetrain. So coming, I believe, next year, the Rotary range extender from Mazda. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, really big news in the auto industry. I tried to cover it yesterday, but as an idiot, I forgot to turn my mic on. So I have this great afternoon commute of me just moving my lips with no sound whatsoever. So obviously we didn't bother posting that one, didn't bother re-recording it because it was so late in the day when it finally dawned on us as we were editing it. So yesterday, the Obama administration announced the fuel economy rules for getting to 54.5 miles per gallon by the 2030 model year. Now, a couple of things about this. 2030 model year is pretty far off. We're entering the 2013 model year. I've tested a couple of 2013 model year cars already. 17 years away. That's a heck of a long time. But it's something that automakers really need to know now so that they can start road mapping their products and what kind of engines are going to put in them, how light they need to be, just even classes of vehicle. Like, are we going to continue to invest in large, full-size sedans? Well, it's going to be hard to justify something like that, even though things like the Chrysler 300 are getting over 30 miles per gallon on the highway. They're with the V6, that's still not going to be good enough for the 54.5 mile per gallon CAFE number, and CAFE is corporate average fuel economy, if you didn't know that already. So 54.5 miles per gallon, not quite as bad as it sounds though, because number one, it's going to obviously gradually ramp its way up to that number. Number two, we're not going to see an average of 54.5 miles per gallon on the window stickers. 54.5 is the original unadjusted calculation. So what that means in the real world is that's probably around high 30s, maybe 40 miles per gallon on the window sticker for the highway number. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds. But that being said, there's a lot that needs to be done to get to that point. So we're going to see a lot more electrification of the automobile. We're going to see more hybrids, more mild hybrids, more start-stop systems, more exotic materials like aluminum hoods, aluminum body panels, like we're going to see in the new Ford trucks in a couple of years. We're going to see probably some carbon fiber if manufacturers can figure out ways to put the stuff together without it costing a fortune. We're also going to see more forced induction. We're going to see more turbocharged small displacement engines. That's definitely the direction things are going. Just look at the luxury car market. Mercedes-Benz knocked its 6.2 liter V8s down to 5.5 liters and added twin turbos. So far, that hasn't necessarily been bad news, because these twin turbo monsters have been putting out more power and more torque than the naturally aspirated engines that they're replacing. So all this technology, though, does not come for free. So the estimate is that this is going to cost, over the life of the program, around $192 billion with a B dollars. That's a fortune. Now that's spread over, let's say, the next 17 years. That's spread over every car that is built and sold in the U.S. Well, not built in the U.S., but every car that's sold in the U.S. And it's probably going to add a couple thousand. I think the estimate I saw was about $2,000 to the cost of a car. The Obama administration is estimating that this will, however, save $8,000 in fuel costs over the life of the car. So that kind of sounds good. I mean, I'm not necessarily thrilled about the idea of smaller cars, smaller engines, things like that. I'm kind of a horsepower guy myself. I think 300 is about my bare minimum at this stage, but we'll see how what the future holds. But one interesting thing is I kept getting emails, and everyone's in favor of this, although I think Volkswagen was kind of annoyed because there wasn't a lot of credit for diesels, but there's some loopholes and some special perks for electric cars and hybrids and things like that. And obviously Volkswagen's not really big into hybrids, they're really big into diesels. So I get all these emails yesterday that, oh, the UAW is behind this, and the Union of Concerned Scientists, and whoever else, everybody's behind this. GM's behind it, Ford's behind it, Chrysler's behind it. Honda's behind it because there's credits for natural gas powered vehicles, and of course Honda sells the only regular production natural gas car in the Civic that is natural gas powered. And the other thing I thought was funny though was there were some survey results shared yesterday via email and all these press releases, and one of them was saying, oh, like, I forget what the percentage was. It was something like 75% of people surveyed would like to have more efficient cars offered for sale. Well, yeah, but that's the typical idiot thinking, oh, well, you know, do you want to have a gas guzzler or do you want to have a 50 mile per gallon car? Well, gee, I think I'd rather have 50 miles per gallon, all things considered. I'm sure these people that they asked weren't considering the trade-offs in having a 50 mile per gallon car. I know they're out there, but I have yet to drive, or at least could afford, any car that is fun to drive that will get 50 miles per gallon. I mean, like, really fun to drive, like sports car, sports sedan type thing. So, not quite sure that those surveys are really fair. I mean, basically, from my point of view, it sounds like everyone's looking for a free lunch. And hey, oh great, I'll take a 54.5 mile per gallon car. So, you know, as long as I don't have to pay extra for it, as long as it doesn't sacrifice any performance, and you know, hey, that's perfect. I'm going to save $8,000 in the 15-year life of my car. Not sure that that's really a viable survey, but at any rate, that's the news. And so expect more efficient cars, expect fuel economy wars to probably over the next few years replace horsepower wars, which a little sad to see the horsepower wars go, but I think the technology is certainly there for fuel economy wars, and we'll see how that goes. I'm Chris Haak from Autosavant.com. Today is Wednesday, August 29th, 2012, and this was your afternoon commute.